So your IIP is well put together. You're very clear on where you want to go. And so as we look at your work here, is there some student work that you want me to look at that's going to be kind of related to this, or
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because like I was saying,
that triggered
the
this?
first assignment will be that autobiographical incident, which we've already done, and I was using that to serve as the entry-level assessment. And even though it's not a multiple choice, identify a term, academic term type assessment, I actually found it far more valuable and useful, and I think that will prove to be so as we get to the final assignment. So, for instance, I've got a couple samples. Like you'll have the same rubric here, but here's a sample of one. Here's a graded one for this young lady. She actually did a really good job on this task.
Oh, I like this rubric.
We have, the autobiographical and biographical narrative components outlined here, aligning with the California standards. And then this assignment, I have to say the entry-level results were far better than I would have imagined, because I, of course, did lessons leading up to this. It wasn't as though I just threw them into a diagnostic without giving them any instruction, like I had done at the very beginning of the year, just to see where they stood. This one, there was instruction that led up to it, and a lot of them seemed to grasp the concept and be able to show that as evident within their writing. So here, this young lady, she met all the requirements. She has her dialogue, her narration. This one, actually, I thought you'd like it, because her autobiographical incident is about the first time she wrote a poem, and it was in my class, and it was for the SAES program. And it's talking about how I almost, it says, come on, Celine, I'll give you 100 points for the whole day. Mr. J, please don't tempt me. When I get tempted like that, I have no choice but to do it. So, she's really carrying her voice, and it maintains a consistent tone throughout this piece. And I actually like this one a lot, too, because as I read it, I remember her poem. It was so powerful. And that was actually when she shared her poem, was when I first noticed the extreme level of compassion within my students. She's a student that you very well may not consider to be the cool or popular student, who might even be, harassed and made fun of. And when she spoke up and she shared her poem with such passion and conviction, it affected the whole class. And I so clearly remember seeing them react and encourage her and support her and commend her afterwards. And she's been so much more vocal and engaged since that day. So kind of a pivotal moment, very much appropriate for an autobiographical narrative.
And so, and when you were saying how it was triggered out of what happened with the students, responding to students, that's beautiful.
Right. It really was. It really was.
Yeah, this is a nice rubric
that
you're using.
Along these lines, this rubric, there will be a few mild modifications, because there's a few differences between the narrative and the actual biography.
Right.
But for all intents and purposes, this rubric will be used throughout the course of the entire unit.
Yes.
On their incident, on the biography they wrote for their peer, on their historical biography, and also as they attempt to produce a griot today. It's not going to have the grammatical writing strategies evident within it, but there will be other components that we'll be able to see. So I have mixed emotions. I'm not sure if I actually want to assess what they produce today with this rubric, because it takes so much more of that poetic spoken word structure. But I can certainly look at what they're doing today and notice whether or not they've grasped the key concepts and gotten those incorporated into the piece.
And so the students are going to share today? So
Sure as heck hope so, if we have enough time, yeah. Okay. And that's really my goal. I really want the students to be able to share their pieces. And they want to share too.
Yes.
They always want to share.
And so what is another piece of student work that you would like to share at this time?
So I've got a collection of ones that I thought here, either met or exceeded the requirement. And so the collection you have here falls in the other range. And so we can look at one, for example, there's one young lady right here. This young lady, she got the general idea of what we were setting out to do. Tell a story of a significant moment, perhaps a pivotal moment within your life, something that is entertaining, whether humorous or emotionally, demanding. and also a lesson learning experience. She understood that much. But when it came to the specifics that we had identified and discussed must be present within
The
the
elements.
text, it's not there. So if you come to the previous, sample, we've got clearly, I mean, her opening, it's this little anecdote right here. It puts you right in the moment. We're lacking in an anecdote and opening attention getter type hook. Now, I know it's not a traditional essay, but we still need to grab the reader right away. She just gets right into her experience. The next thing, she's lacking dialogue, and dialogue really enriches that personal narrative or autobiographical incident, and thus the reflection on the dialogue. Because the dialogue, more often than not, is going to be coming from somebody else, and then you get that little internal reflection on how you took it. So there's a great discrepancy between these two in terms of meeting the needs.
And so, is there going to be a follow-up activity where they'll go back in and, like her, select one and then revise it, or?
Oh yeah, certainly. So yeah, once they get all these back, which should be hopefully at the end of this week, because before they go into writing the biography, now, interestingly, the biography is not necessarily going to have dialogue. As much as it's going to have quotations, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
Referencing sources and so on. But it's still taking that same in-text citation practice and punctuation for citation practice into the next one. So they're going to get this back, and there'll be a handful of things I'm going to ask them to go over and work on.
And when you see these kind of concerns, like she left out the dialogue, do you look at your class and see how many students left out dialogue, so you see, is this something I need to go back and reteach, or make
it's not with not intentionally. It usually reveals itself, so after I'll see the trend as I'm going through them. But more often than not, it'll be one or two things, but it's usually individual student issues, whether it's an EL issue and plurals, and then I'll work with them individually on it. So when I'm grading a paper, I'm not grading everything. I'm grading 2 or 3 things, and we'll hold conversations around that.
And one of the things also is that as you're taking just segments of writing to read versus trying to read the whole essay, you're looking for particular components, especially when you have 120 papers to grade. That's a good way to not get overwhelmed.
It's a rather daunting task.
Yes, it is. That's good. So as we looked at your student work, it looks like it's informing your instruction. So let's look at your essential components for your instruction, for your lesson.
Right. Okay. Well, first, how did I want to get students to connect this to the real life application? This is something that we've even discussed transitioning into real life and so on, compassion and taking that with you, but also having the articulate means to express your sympathy for it or understanding of it. So I'm going to facilitate, real life testimonials, whether I'm offering for myself, I'm going to encourage students to offer in the course of an interview for each other, which will then allow them to transition into taking that, that content and moving into the actual activity, the assignment of writing it. Essentially, I said my goal is by the end of the lesson, I want students to be able to draft an autobiographical narrative, compose an original griot based off a peer interview, draft a peer biography, and lastly, write a historical biography. So I know it seems like a lot, but it does string together well.
Right. It sounds like it's a continuation.
Yeah,
so this is a segment.
It's something we've agreed on as a department, just to kind of up the ante a little bit. And so yeah, as you know, and we've discussed, the entry level assessment was the autobiographical incident, and it was assessed using that same rubric there, and that rubric again, as I mentioned here, is going to be carried throughout each of the tasks and used as a tool to measure. That
continuity is really good.
I think that's important. It's very important there. And obviously, again, as mentioned earlier, the historical biography will be their summative assessment. And I would look at entry level versus summative, not in terms of what was your score here versus your score here, but specifically the growth, the growth in the performance, and not a number score.
So it looks like you're creating your lesson, coming out of your diagnostic with your students. Their activities, it sounds like you're going to model what you're expecting them to do, and have an opening entry event that will help, one, you started, and then bringing them in to kind of model what you're expecting them to do in their writing and working with each other. And also modeling the expectation of demonstrating that kind of compassion and also empathy while they're working together.
That's right.
And your assessment for today, they're going to work on writing the griot today, but ultimately this is just a small component of a larger lesson.
Exactly.
And so today they're going to be in their groups and start working on their griots.
Yeah, let's actually talk about the lesson.
Oh, okay.
So today's game plan, and I think your lesson should be, I gave you a copy, the very last 2 pages.
Okay. And can I pivot back also?
Of course, please, yeah.
We talked about technology. Any technology you're going to have to use today? Or is it working today?
Oh, you know the technology situation's a little sticky. No technology today.
Okay. And what instructional strategies you'll be using in your lesson in the series?
Yeah, so like, I'm a direct instruction guy. Get them hooked somehow, and then I want to explain the objectives, model the expectations, hold their hand a little bit in the guided practice, and then let them do it on their own and keep tabs on them as they're doing it and make sure they're moving in the right direction. So you should see, that's usually commonplace in my classroom.
And do you have any, I'm looking at number 12, do you have any modifications or accommodations that you have to take into consideration with this lesson for your students?
The only one that's like mandated, written into it is allowing more time. Actually 2, and it's for one student, one of my focus students, the special case student, special learner, excuse me, his 504 plans, and no, his IEP specifically states breaking assignments into smaller, more manageable pieces, as well as giving more time when necessary. But then again, he's also a very vocal young man and enjoys this type of lesson. So I don't believe that will really need to take place. So not really too many accommodations I think will be necessary.
And also, as I'm hearing you talk about the lesson, you already have it broken down into chunks.
Right.
So you can see where if they're not understanding something at a place, you can see, okay, and make the adjustments there. All right, and you have your level entry assessment already.
Right. And we can actually, let's.
And how are you going to monitor the progress? How are you going to assess their progress as you're going through this lesson, since it's only 50 minutes? I know.
That's just the frequent checking for understanding. I mean, moving around the classroom, making sure I'm seeing all students on task, engaged within the lesson, answering any questions if possible. Another thing, is I've got my poet mentor who'll be present, and he's amazing in the classroom. The students love him. He's got a great relationship with them, and he's not afraid to go ahead and poke his nose in and intervene and redirect if need be the case. But I think it will be less formal today in terms of what we'll be able to see, other than them meeting the exit price, which will, at the very least, to have been to compose, or start to write the griot, synthesizing all the information they collected from their group.
Oh, so you're going to team teach today?
Team teaching a little bit today,
great.
Yeah.
And 13 is talking about, in order for students to be successful, what ELD proficiency level or data you need to consider in the standards.
Right. Academic vocabulary, it's a must. I always tell my students I care about quality, not quantity. And it almost applies here. I care that they're able to convey a meaningful, valuable story versus knowing exactly how to properly cite, someone they referenced or quoted. But nonetheless, they will be assessed on that, and that data is very important. So academic language, vocabulary, highlighting and pointing that out as we see it within examples. We've looked at so many examples, and that's one thing I'll always do is expose my students to a number of examples of what they're going to be expected to produce prior to putting them into the lesson. So just the vocab, heavy hammer on the vocab, and yeah, that should work for that population.
And so now we're going to talk about your focus students.
All right.
Okay.
All right. The first student, my first student that I'm looking at, he an EL student, but he's been reclassified, and sometimes that can actually be more of more harmful than it is beneficial to the individual because they're accustomed to receiving, additional help because they're EL issues. But